Good morning-ish. It's almost lunchtime. Let's try this again. Good morning. Good morning. Okay, thank you. It's rude if you don't answer. Before we start, let's do like a tiny survey. I'm not gonna trick you into give me a on standing ovation again, but if you're a native English speaker, please say yes, and don't raise your hand because it's useless for the camera. But say yes if you're a non-native English speaker. Yes. Cool. If your parents are not from the country that you were born in, say yes. Oh, that's awesome. If you speak two or more languages, please say yes. Yes. There you go. And if you're an expat, please say yes. Cool. So, if we get this thing to work, actually. Okay. Yeah. So, what I wanted to show with these questions is how diverse our communities are and how diverse we are within each other. And these are like very basic questions, but they highlight some of the most common things that we are diverse in and that we normally don't acknowledge when we're talking to other people and we go to conferences and do other stuff. So, again, like some questions before we get into the content of the talk. You know, what is a system? Who can help me out here? What do you guys think a system is when it comes to communities? Someone? No one? Okay.
Something with a lot of moving parts.
Yes, that is not far from what I consider a system is. So the system is that it is a means that you use to empower your community to be amazing. Are all those processes that you set up in place so that your community can actually exist and you can get stuff done when you're in a community. So what is a culture when it comes to communities? Exactly. Yes. So the culture is how people interact and how people actually do stuff in the community. So you can have all the systems you want, but people will use those systems based on their own culture in certain ways. So culture is exactly how people interact in the community. And there's the last one, I promise. What is it? Flexibility. 1, 2 seconds. Yes, exactly. So flexibility is the level of tolerance, to variance that you have in your system. It's how flexible your system can be when it comes to your community and when it comes to managing your own community. So if there's anything I really want you to take out of this presentation, is this thing here. I normally don't read my slides, but I'm going to read this one. So you must tolerate variance in your community to empower humans from any culture, like hopefully any culture, to be amazing in your community. This is what you gotta strive for. Again, this is if there's anything like I really want you to take from this presentation is this. So if you're happy with this, you can also leave the room. It's fine, but please stay. It's funnier if you stay. So I'm Flavio, or Flavio87 in the new social means called Twitter. You can follow me there or not. And this is growing your community without dying in 30 minutes because that's all I got, and I'll try to do my best to go through it. Thank you all for being here. I know we're all pretty much hungry at this point. Feel free to interrupt me at any time if you have questions. I still work at Red Hat. Twitter handler. If you attended my previous talk, you already know the joke that I'm gonna make. But so I love feedback, and if you like the presentation, if you like what I'm saying, please let me know. I love feedback. If you don't like it, forget my name. That is not me. That is not my email address. I was never here. But seriously, like if there's something that you would like to see in this presentation, if there's something that you think I'm missing when it comes to communities, do let me know, because we all have different experiences and we've all lived our interactions within with other members of every community in a different way. So I really want to hear from you. A couple of disclaimers. I tend to speak very fast. I just have half an hour, so I'm going to speak faster. the advisory explicit content, I normally drop F-bombs. I'm sorry in advance. I don't do that on purpose, and let's get to it. So, governance is necessarily. Many people confuse the governance with politics. It has nothing to do with politics. Governance are the bodies that are, that manages all the processes that you have in your community, right? So processes are important, and communities as important as the processes that exist in your community. And you might not have governance. You might think that you don't have governance, but as soon as you start building the processes in your community for it to exist, you're kind of like establishing your governance model already. And there are many different governance models. There can be PFDLs, there can be like elected bodies, there can be all kind of different governance models. But you should pick one whenever you're starting your own community, because the governance model is what you're gonna use, or what the members of your community are gonna refer to whenever they need to do something. And hopefully you're gonna automate most of that. So what is a process really? Like when you set up a process, what we're talking about here, we're talking about the way you merge code, the way you communicate in your community, the way you review bugs, the way you set your expectations, the way you establish the mission and the vision of your own community. So all these processes are the ones that build your community, that are the ones that define your community, and the governance around these processes is the process or the bodies that actually interact with the processes and that help you setting them up. So it is really important. Like every community has it. Like OpenStack community has a process. A governance model. The Python community has one. The Kubernetes community has one. So it's critical. And as soon as your community starts growing, it is even more important to actually define them and actually make sure that people understand what the governance model is like. So it is easy to get caught up in all the details of building a community and the details behind having a governance model and having processes for your community. And it's so easy to get caught up in that we forget that these governance models and the processes need to follow the community, and it is not the other way around. So if you have your community going behind your governance or just going behind the processes that you have set up in place and put in place for your community, you're doing it wrong. The processes should adapt and they should evolve to make your community be better. Remember, like what we said at the very beginning, like your community needs to be flexible and it needs to adapt to the new processes, to the new changes that are happening in your community, so that it can exist and it can keep growing. And so, if you really want your processes to follow your community, if you really want the governance model to follow the community, you gotta know your community. You gotta know what your community is built like, and what it looks like, and who's part of your community. And when I say this, I mean you don't have to know every single person in your community. You gotta know the demographics of your community. That would be awesome, right? If you can get the information, that's awesome. You gotta know how many people from different groups, cultures, genders, etc. do you have in your community, so that you can make it better. You gotta know what the different backgrounds, or hopefully get some extra information about that from the members of your community. It's critical to know your community, because it is the only way that you're gonna be able to keep your eyes open, keep your ears open to the different changes that are happening, and to make sure that you're not gonna make a change in your community and your processes that are gonna affect or leave out some people, right? So, for example, if you're trying to build the process or some ways to communicate in your community, and you say like, well, from now on, we're just gonna do video calls, right? You don't realize that there's a huge part of your community comes from Asia, right? And then you say like, well, like we've been speaking in English, and we've been using English as a main language for our community for a while, so we're just gonna do video calls in English. Like we're kind of like leaving out a lot of people in Asia, because I hope you know that Asia doesn't use English as a native language in most of the countries.
You're also leaving out hard of hearing people.
Exactly. So you gotta be aware of that, so that you can make the right decisions and make sure that you're not leaving out important people in your community. And with full honesty, this actually happened in the OpenStack community, where we used to have all the OpenStack summits in the US. And at some point we said, like, well, it's really not growing any more than this. what's happening. And they say, well, it turns out that we've got a lot of people in Europe and Asia, and there are visa problems, there's language barriers, there's a whole bunch of different issues that you gotta take into account whenever you're building a community. So, know your community. Take the time to actually shake hands and read the names of the people that send emails and how they speak and how they communicate. And when you start doing that, you start listening more and more to your community, which is critical, because not only you're going to know who's around, and not only you're going to know what people, where people is from, where people are from, but you'll also know what their needs are. You're going to learn how to interpret those needs, and this is key, because not many people communicate their needs. This is a cultural thing. Not many people are open to just write down an email and send it over and say like, hey, I do not like this from the community. I wish we could, instead of doing video calls, we would just use IRC and communicate through written means, because it is easier for me. Like, not many cultures are open to that, because that is their culture. They're not used to it, and that is fine. You gotta embrace that, and you gotta acknowledge that, so that the sooner you do that, the sooner you'll start finding the hints in the communications and the stuff that happen in your community based on metrics or the way people communicate again, so that you can adapt your community and make sure that you're not leaving out anyone. But we tend to like force ourselves to, even individually or at a community level, we tend to force ourselves to make everyone happy. That is not possible. There's only so much you can do, and there's only so much flexibility you can have in your community without really affecting it in a negative way. So understand what your change, what the impact that, if you're going to apply a change, understand what impact this change has in your community. Understand who's going to affect and how it is going to affect those groups, so that you can make the trade-off. You can make the choice based on the trade-offs, and based on what I'm going to do, I'm going to not say lose, but this is going to affect in a negative way this group of people. But this is going to sound bad, but we've got a lot of them, so we want some extra from this side of the world, right? So make sure you understand the trade-offs of every choice that you make, and make sure you also understand that there are trade-offs in every choice that you'll make in your community. And it's important to keep that in mind. And then if you want, like, when you start doing that, and when you keep in mind all the trade-offs that every choice that you make have, you'll understand as well that your choices as an individual member of your community not only impact, like, they're not important just at a community level, but they're also important at a personal level, right? We are all members of a community. The fact that I am part of the governance model of a certain community doesn't mean that superior in any way to anyone in the community. And everything that I do, every single group in the community is part of a community. And the interactions between these different groups and between the people in the community is as important as the governance model itself. So if we understand that we're customers of each other, and we treat ourselves with enough respect, and we understand the trade-offs of every decision that we make, even at a personal level within the community, it's going to be easier to build a stronger relationship and make sure that the governance model and the processes that we have in place will still work smoothly, hopefully. But to do that, you gotta strive. So it is easy when you set up the processes. It is very easy to end up setting processes that are subjective, right? You want to do something, and you want to measure something, and you want to make some decisions, and these decisions end up being subjective. And I can give you an example of that. So when the OpenStack community started, it started as an infrastructure as a service. So there was this feeling and thought that all the services and the projects that would be allowed in the community must have something related to infrastructure, right? They would have to manage networks, network devices, or virtual machines, or bare metal storage devices, all that kind of things. So we ended up having projects that would come up, great ideas, people that wanted to join, and there were a lot of like very subjective decisions. So at some point we said, okay, it's not only infrastructure. OpenStack is a cloud provider, and like how are we going to accept all these projects? And we set up processes for incubating projects, and then the projects will come out of incubation, and they will go through a maturity period, and eventually the technical committee would vote whether the project could join the community or not. So this voting process was extremely subjective, and because it was hard, like you're asking people to provide opinions and votes on projects, and there are not exact metrics to follow to do that. So it ended up being very subjective, and it actually harmed the community quite a bit. So the solution to that was like, well, what the heck? We're not going to evaluate anything. So if the project has been around for a bit and it follows the OpenStack mission, then we're good. It's fine. It's in, right? We don't need to evaluate anything about this project. But to be objective, there must be clear expectations. It's all about expectations. Like I cannot be objective and evaluate something in the community. The process cannot evaluate something if you don't have clear expectations. So I gotta tell you clearly what I expect you to do, how I expect things to look like in the community, and why they should look like that. And again, like you can do these through the processes, and you can automate all that. And one key thing about being objective, one key thing about having objective metrics, I guess, is that when you have objective metrics, you can also automate those. And we've automated most of the things in the OpenStack community, like even the acceptance of projects and the process to create new projects in the community, like the way we merge code, it is pretty much automated. Like the human interaction with these processes is at the very minimum at this point. And this is something that we want to keep, because that basically prevents any like subjective interaction with other people and subjective interaction with the community itself. And something we learned along the way is that as we started setting expectations, we also got feedback from the community, and the community started saying, your expectations are awesome, but they're based on something that happened in the past, and that turns out that is not true anymore. So what about we just change those expectations and we evolved into something different, right? So something you need to do is like make sure that the community understands that they can set expectations as well. So it is not, you have a governance model, but the governance entities, they are there to make sure that things are still in place and they're not falling apart. But you want the community to be part of the governance model to some extent. You want the community to help you set expectations, the vision and the mission of the project in your own community. So be as inclusive as possible there, and set the bar at a reasonable level. And as you set the processes, the way you review code, how many code reviewers you need to merge a patch, how many, the process to, what are the requirements for projects to join your community and all that. When you set those processes, set them at a reasonable level. One easy way is you just like settle like very low, and then you start raising the bar as you move along. And the benefit here is that you allow projects to experiment. You allow projects to just or people in general to just come in and say like, well, I had this idea, and the bar is at the level it is right now. It allows me to do that. It's something that it is good for the community or not, and then you get to reason about the new things that people are experimenting with, and eventually adapt your community to it. And again, like you need to communicate as much as possible in your community. You need to communicate expectations. You need to communicate processes. You need to document all that. If you don't communicate enough, people won't know what's happening. And it's easy when you have a small community of 5 people, right? And then you can send an email, and you make sure that email will reach everyone. Like you can even chat on RC, and you don't have any of those problems. But when the community grows and it goes up to 3,000, 7,000 people, then it's really hard to make sure that the members of your community are aware of everything that's happening, the changes that are happening in the processes and the governance model. So you gotta communicate expectations. If you don't communicate expectations, it's really hard to be objective. It's really hard for people to actually interact with your community. And the fact that you communicate expectations, it is not gonna get rid of surprises. You can communicate as much as you want, but it's not gonna get rid of surprises. There's still going to be people that don't, that miss some emails, that miss some communications, and it is fine. And sometimes, again, like sometimes it's better to over-communicate. You send an email, it's pressing, like communicating some change that happened or a new process that you set up in place, and people might miss that email. And well, the recommendation here is like we'll send it like several times in different time zones, in different times during the day, because people read emails in different times, and sometimes it is better to over-communicate. Or you can set an email and then write a blog post and then communicate on a meeting and stuff like that. So, and like I said before, it's not gonna get rid of surprises because like we're humans, right? And we have shit happening in our own lives, right? And so we're not only always online. We're not always like reading emails and making sure that we don't miss any message on RC, right? So you're not gonna get rid of surprises, and you gotta be open to that. You gotta be ready to deal with people not knowing what's happening in the community. And the sooner you acknowledge that we're all humans, the better, because then you'll also start creating processes to manage these like missed communications, and you're going to understand that we are not expected to be online 24 hours per day. I hope you're not expected to be online 24 hours per day. You're free to do it, but I wouldn't. It's not good for you. So you gotta acknowledge that we're all humans. You gotta acknowledge that we have families, we have houses, and we're not always ready to deal with all the things that happen in our community. And if you acknowledge that everyone is human, you're going to start also striving for diversity. You gotta strive for diversity, and I'm not gonna. When I say diversity, I'm not only talking about gender diversity. I'm talking about cultural diversity. I'm talking about language diversity, age diversity, like all kind of diversity that you can strive for. You should strive for that. Because not everyone addresses problems the same way, not everyone interacts with other people the same way, and the more diverse your community is, the better it is for you. And I'm saying this not because I read it on Twitter, I'm saying this because we actually saw it happening in the OpenStack community. And you have people from different cultures, and then you have problems that you have to solve. And as soon as you start talking to people from different cultures, you realize how they want to solve the problem, and you get to organize, and you get to kind of like plan things even based on culture. And it is fascinating to see how different cultures and how different people are, and how they want to address the problems that we're all having at the same time. So acknowledge that you have to strive for diversity, work on it, and make sure that you're inclusive to everyone. And remember that since we're all humans, we all have emotions. We all suffer for things that happen in our lives, right? So we all deal with emotions in a different way. You get people that say, like I'm thick-skinned, and I don't, emotions don't get to me. Like I'm strong. Like nothing happens. That's bullshit. We all have emotions. We just deal with them in a different way. So acknowledge that people actually can get mad, and not every day is a good day for everyone. And try to be careful when you're interacting with other people. Try to be careful and try to reach for signs that will tell you how this person is feeling. Especially if you work with that person closely. It doesn't have to be in your same company. Like I normally joke saying that Red Hat pays my salary and just work on OpenStack, because that is exactly how my day goes. I wake up and I just go to the OpenStack IRC channel and I start talking with people from other companies and other places in the world. So you're talking to people that are having different problems in their lives that you're probably not aware of. So acknowledge that people have emotions. Acknowledge that you might be angry. If you're angry, also acknowledge that you have emotions. If you're angry, stay away from the keyboard. Like when it happens to me, like I have this rule where I don't reply to emails when I'm angry, hungry, or when it is late at night, because that's not gonna end well. And if I start replying, I'll read it like 3 or 4 times, and I always try to delete the to field and leave it empty, because you can make mistakes and send it accidentally, but you gotta have your own rules, and because you know yourself better than anyone else. Acknowledge your emotions. Acknowledge things that get to you. If if I would go full transparent, I'll say, the emotions that really drive me nuts is frustration. So whenever I feel frustrated, I always try to not, stay away from talking to other people because I don't want to, give that person a bad day, and I know myself, right? So do the same. And there's some good thing about people. Like, you can tell people how to behave, but you cannot tell people how to think. And when you tell someone assume good faith, and I would love people to always assume good faith, but I cannot force anyone to actually do it. But I really think you should assume good faith. And when you assume good faith, you are assuming that other people are not doing stuff to harm you, but are doing those things to do, with a goal that might not be that you might not agree entirely with. But if you assume good faith, you'll take the time to actually ask that person why the things are happening, right? So if I make a change, so if you take OpenStack as an example, we're different companies with different goals and targets working on the same project, right? So if you have different companies working on the same project, it is easy to assume that some company is pushing some patches because they need that for their own purpose, right? It's not helping the community, it's just helping the company, right? And this happens a lot. So if you assume good faith, you'll say like, hey, your patch it's great, but this is how I read it. Could you please explain, the goal of the patch and, walk me through it? Instead of just going full ballistic on public and saying like, well, you're just benefiting your own freaking company and I don't like you and blah, 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 blah. And then the rage and then quit and fire and Gary goes down. And, you don't want that. You just want to have like constructive conversation. So assume good faith about people. And I'll take it a step further. Forget about coding, just emails, right? Think about people that are not non-native English speakers, right? It's already hard enough to have to read emails in English and have to reply to emails in English. So if you're gonna nitpick on people's words, you're gonna learn like a lot of time, right? So you're not gonna code anything and you're gonna spend all your day reading emails and trying to nitpick on the people's words. So assume good faith about the emails, assume good faith about what people are saying, because for non-native English speakers at least, it is very easy to just like translate straight from their language to English. And it not always sounds good, it not always reads well. And the same thing happens in the other way around. So assume good faith about people and they'll save you a lot of time and it'll make you happier. It makes me happier. Tribal thinking is definitely not good. So tribal thinking happens when you start assuming that people agree with you based on the culture of your community. And again, this happened in OpenStack. OpenStack started like a very small community and it blew up like very fast at some point. And we had a lot of tribal thinking and we assumed that people, they agreed with us. And then eventually one day we came up with, a list of principles and said, we thought about, to set expectations straight, we wanted to write the principles down and we published them and the rest of the community came up and was like, well, I don't agree with that. And it turns out, it's been 5 years since we actually, changed that. And, a whole bunch of things that we thought that were true. But that was just only tribal thinking. So we ended up having, we ended up saying, what, let's forget it. Let's write the principles from the very beginning with the entire community. So what does the community think the principles of OpenStack are? And that's how we started all from scratch, basically. But tribal thinking is harmful. So it is great to also, again, write everything down, be explicit about the principles and the, processes in your community so that other people can contribute to it. And reach out. And stats are not, numbers, you give a human a number and that human will do the impossible to make it grow, except for the credit card balance. That is the only number that no one wants to see growing. But it's, besides that, number of commits, I can get to 1 million. Number of emails, I can send 1 million emails if you want. Number of friends on Facebook, let's not even talk about it. So you give a human a number and then that human will do the impossible to make it grow. So stats are not always a source of objectiveness, right? I don't care how many commits you've done. I don't care how many emails you send. I don't care about those numbers when it comes to see your involvement in the community. Because I want to talk to you. I want to know what you think about a community. I want to know how you want to make the community better. That is what matters to me when it comes to communities. The number of commits, again, everyone can do that. number of emails. Again, everyone can do that. And it is not fair, because like, if we take the non-English speakers, members of your community, again, as an example, they're not gonna send as many emails as a native English speaker, because it takes them more time to actually read them and write them, right? So there are only so many hours in one day. And if it takes you like half an hour to just read one email and you have to read it like 3 times, then you're kind of like penalized already on that perspective. So if you're going to start using stats and metrics to measure your community, you gotta be very careful on what stats you're using. Because most of the time, those stats are gonna harm your community and not gonna actually help it in any way. And Mark Twain said once that every generalization is false, including this one. Well, this is my version when it comes to statistics. Stats actually say that stats are not good. So sometimes they are, but many times they're not. Again, like be extremely careful when it comes to measuring performance, if you want to call it that way, of your community. And when you do that, just keep in mind that you have humans in your community. So wrapping it up, I already said this. I'm just gonna skip this one. Community growth it is not only about having more stars on GitHub. Community growth is about growing the community in number of humans. You wanna have more humans in your community. You don't want to just have stars, because stars are not gonna give you contributions. Stars are just gonna say like, hey, yeah, sure, I acknowledge that you exist, period, right? So you want to have humans contributing to your project. You want your project to grow. And you don't really have to go to 1,000 people, right? It is awesome to have a 20 people community. That is a great community too. Like your project doesn't necessarily have to have like 5,000 people, right? So it has to do with many things. It has to do with cultural gaps. It has to do with language. It has to do with the way you interact with people and the processes that you set up to actually contribute to your project. And your project can be anything. It can be a code project. It can be, a mentoring project. It can be, building classes to, share knowledge and, teach people how to code. That is an amazing project. So you want to have a community there. So you got to set up your processes very well and make sure that you have more humans contributing to it. So don't just focus on, how many stars you have and how many followers you have on Twitter. Because again, like those are numbers that are completely useless and they won't bring you anything useful. And processes will evolve in your community, and you gotta be flexible and adapt as fast as possible to these processes. Again, take the example of the OpenStack community being so close to new projects. That was acknowledged. It was a huge change, and it came out with, the side effect of that change was actually not evaluated carefully, and we're still taking the hit of that change, but we are not like, I don't regret it opening the doors to all the projects that we have now. It does have a side effect on the community, and we're dealing with that at this point. But understand that there are side effects, but you have to adapt as much as possible to the changes happening in your community. And as Gilles Deleuze said, technology is social before it is technology. So again, your community, you can have the most amazing project in the world, and that will bring people to the moon. But if you don't have people to send to the moon, your project is entirely useless. So remember the social aspects of your community. If you acknowledge that and acknowledge the humans around the community, you're gonna be successful. And also, yeah, you should say thanks. We forget very often to say thanks to people that are contributing to our projects in any way, like even sending an email. Like we often forget about it. So we even have processes in OpenStack to highlight the successes that we've had and a way to say thanks to the contributors in our community. So you should be thanking the people. I'm not saying, Iman, if you have like 5,000 people in your community, it's gonna be really hard to thank everyone every day. But say thanks to the people that you work close with, because it is extremely appreciated. I personally appreciate it. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you very much, Flavio. We have 5 minutes for Q&A. So, any questions?
I wanted to say thank you for all your wonderful insights, and especially for reminding people that diversity isn't just about gender or race, it's also about perspective and culture and things like that. So,
Yeah,
thanks.
Thank you.
Any other question?
You've spoken a lot about community building, and I wondered what kind of processes you find it useful to follow when somebody is not fitting with the community in a certain way. How do you tactfully handle situations like that?
So, in the spirit of always assuming good faith, I normally talk to the people directly first and foremost, and I want to understand what's going on. You know, like, or what's wrong about the community. You know, there might be many things happening in that human head that, you know, that human might not be willing to share with me, which is perfectly fine. But I do want to know what I can do. Without knowing what's happening, I want to know what I can do to make that human feel comfortable in the community. The answer by me might be, there's nothing you can do. And again, like, I'm fine with that. But I do want to know that. So I first talk to the human and try to understand that. If the problem is different, well, you know, you can handle it a different way. But as far as people not feeling comfortable within the community, I want to understand why and how we can fix it.
I wanted to ask, which is, in your experience, the most common cultural problem in the OpenStack community that you have faced in some way?
Two things. And so the first one has actually gotten better over the years, and it is the language barrier. The community has grown a lot, and it started in the US. So it's very easy to assume that. It's not like people assume that everyone speaks English, because it is already well known that not everyone in the community speaks English. But often people don't take enough time to actually listen to what other humans have to say when they don't speak, when they're not native English speakers. So, you know, we're chatting on. So think about a meeting, and you have like 10 people there. 8 of them are native English speakers, and you know, you start the meeting and you throw the hot topic in there. You know, like you open the can of worms. You know, everyone starts writing at the same time, and there are 2 people that are non-native English speakers. So it'll take them a lot of time to read the messages that are being sent by these 8 other humans, and they're not gonna make it in time to actually reply to them, right? So the opinions of these 2 people are being accidentally ignored. I want to say accidentally because, you know, again, assuming good faith. So they're being accidentally ignored. And this is something that has gotten better over the years, but it's still happening. And the second one would be time zones. Like, people are not aware of time zones still. It's, you know, we're in a worldwide community, and you still have people talking in PSD, and I'm like, I don't fucking care about PSD, man. You know, talk about UTC, right? At least that, you know, have the courtesy to change from your time zone to something, to common ground, which is UTC for us, right? So just that. We might not find the perfect time for our call, right? Because we have someone in India, someone in, you know, the West Coast, and some other human in Australia. So try to organize a meeting for that in a good time. You know, it's impossible. But, you know, you might not find the right time there, but at least have the courtesy to speak in a, you know, time zone that we can all understand. Just go to the common ground. Don't expect me to go to your ground, right? So time zones is the other problem that I think are still happening. It sounds silly to some extent, but it's not. It's really not. Because I have OpenStack meetings that happen at 11 p.m. my time. So I'm sorry if I show up like half drunk to the meeting, but hello, human, I've been working the entire day and I still have to attend the meeting. It is my choice to be there. Like, no one is forcing me to be in that meeting. It's my choice, and I acknowledge that. But as a member of the community, I also want people to know that it is late for me, and that might be extremely, you know, early for other people. And that, you know, like, we have different time zones. We live in different places.
So how much of that is fixed by having asynchronous processes available for communication?
A lot, as in, I personally tend to encourage people to just send emails. Right? I'm not an email fan actually. Because it takes me time. You know, you go through emails, you have to reply. You got to be careful. You got to be super careful in the way you communicate because, you know, people might interpret your email in different ways, right? But I always encourage people to send emails because it is easier. I can just read the email whenever I want, and I can reply whenever I want. But we still have meetings in place that are happening on RC, but they're happening, right? So we kind of like have to find times that would work for different humans in different time zones. So, but you know, in the OpenStack community list, which is the one that I'm part of, and I spend most of my time on. The OpenStack mailing list, there are more than probably 10,000 emails happening like every month, probably more than that. So it's massive. Like there's a lot of traffic in there, which kind of like highlights the fact that people are acknowledging that asynchronous communication is probably better when it comes to communicating with people in other time zones. Yes. So a lot is fixed by having asynchronous means for communicating. And you know, many people say like, well, you know, like I'm not always on RC, but I have a bouncer. It's like I don't want you to have a bouncer. Like, if you want to have it, fine. You can have a bouncer. Also, if people don't know what a bouncer is, like you set up this relay server that is always connected to IRC, and when someone pings you and you're not around, you're still gonna get the message when you wake up. So, you know, that is what emails are for, right? You know, you wanna have a bouncer and set it up, it's fine. It is your choice. But I don't want you to have it because you have to. I want you to have it because you want to, right? It's very different. So if you feel like you have to have a bouncer to be part of the community, then we're doing something wrong.
Thank you, Flavio. Maybe one last quick question.
I just wondered if you had any experience in the OpenStack community with diversity regarding disability or neurodiversity, and if there was something you could say about that.
So yes and no. I know we have people with diverse abilities. I prefer to call it diverse abilities. But I don't have like direct experience because I'm not part of like some of the organizations part of the foundation and the community. I'm part of the online community, if you will. You know. So when it comes to different disabilities, like spaces for conferences, and I know there are other different disabilities, but when it comes to that, it's normally all taken care of by the foundation itself. So I don't have like direct experiences. I know we are diverse in that area as well, if that helps with anything. But I don't have direct experiences with that.
So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Flavio, for the talk.
Cheers.